Yo, what's going on, guys and girls? Hope everyone is doing well. Thank you so much for tuning in to another week of what I like to call Mind Over Markets. This is your bi-weekly dose of a little bit of psychology, a little bit of an opportunity to better get to know yourself so that you have an opportunity to improve your performance in the markets. First and foremost, I just want to make sure, especially for those of you on Discord where I'm kind of watching the chat at the moment, can everyone hear and see me all good? Just give me a quick yes in the chat if visual and audio is all clear. Okay, hoping everything is all good there. Perfect. Okay, all right, we're going to continue moving forward. Today, we've got a very good session lined up for you today, and one that is very, very important to talk about as part of how you manage your performance as a trader. Now, something that I want you guys to be aware of, and something that you'll often hear me talking about in a lot of these sessions, is this idea that as an aspiring trader, your primary purpose, your primary job in everything that you do is always around the idea of how you manage risk, right? There is no crystal ball. There is nothing that you can do that will correctly and accurately predict the outcome of the next trade with 100% certainty, regardless of what level of experience you have in the markets. So if this is true, then something that you have to be aware of is that your ability to succeed is largely centered around the idea of keeping your losses small and your winners as large as possible, as long as they align with your data, which makes up part of your edge in the market. Now, today, we're specifically going to be focusing on the idea of risk management, right? We're focusing specifically on the idea of how much you should be risking in each and every trade that you're going to be taking. Now, I want to start off by actually asking you guys to just take 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and actually reflect on a question that I want to throw your way. And that question I want to start with is, I want to ask you guys, how much money should you be risking in every trade that you take? How much do you actually risk at the moment, and how much should you be risking going forward? Is this something that you guys have actively thought about? Is this something that you've been very, very conscious about how you choose to define risk? Or is it something that you've taken from some advice that you've seen online, or in an instructional video, in a course or a mentorship that you're a part of, which is helping you to figure out how to find your edge in the market? You see, in my experience, what I tend to find is most people don't actually give this the thought that it needs in order to help maximize their performance in the market. And this is largely what today's session is going to be about. We're going to be unpacking the mindset behind risk management and how you can make subtle tweaks to what you're doing to help really refine your approach in the long run and really maximize your edge in terms of your performance in the market. Now, I'm hoping you guys have had a few seconds to think about this idea in terms of how much you should be risking. And I presume, again, I'm going to go out on a leg here. Please feel free to agree or disagree in the chat if you've come up with any answer different to this. But I presume most people have come up with a number like 1% or 0.5% or a couple of percent risk per trade, right? Maybe we should take this in a different direction. What if I asked you to think about how much is too much risk? How much would somebody need to risk per trade for you to look at their position size or look at the amount of risk that they are taking relative to their account and actually say, you're risking too much? Would it be 3%, 5%, 10% per trade? What would it take, right? What number, what percentage of the account balance, what lot size would it take for you to justify, to say to someone, this is too much risk and you need to scale back? Now, what I want you guys to start understanding here is there is actually no rule book when it comes to risk management. Risk management isn't something that's black or white. It's very much a shade of gray, and it has to be tailored to your specific approach to the market. Because I can guarantee there's going to be somebody watching this call, whether you're here live, whether you're watching this back on a recording, you would have thought maybe the right risk is 1%, whereas somebody else could be sitting on the other side and they could be saying the right risk is 0.5%. Or 2%, or 3%, or 5% per trade. I've done these sorts of sessions many times, and when I ask this sort of question, I seem to get a variety of different responses. So the question then becomes, what is the right amount of risk for you? And the thing that you have to understand is it's a very, very subjective question because it depends on you as the person. For some people, it depends on the amount of capital that they're trading. For some people, it depends on the strategic approach, how they're actually getting in and out of the market. And these are three really important criteria that I think not enough people truly consider to determine how it's going to impact their performance in the long run. And it's something that I really want to go through and really clarify for you today to give you something to take away, think about, and maybe start testing to see how it can influence and maybe improve or worsen your edge over time, depending on how you tweak things. And obviously, we want to go down the route of improvement, right? Now, another question to ask you guys is how many of you at some point in time, and again, take this as a reflective question, something to think about going forward. How many of you have suffered from over leveraging, right? Risking too much in any one single position, whether that's a certain percentage of your account, whether it's a lot size, whether it's using a stop loss that's too small, but over leveraging in some way that it's hindered your performance. And I guess the question that follows that is, how would you define over leverage? Is there a black or white number that comes to mind when you think, and again, you think about that situation where somebody has just risked too much? Now, bringing all this together, the questions that I asked earlier on about how much you should be risking, the idea about what is actually over leveraging and what is the right amount of risk. The thing that I want you to think about here and now is, where did my belief system come from when it came to managing risk, right? When it comes to deciding how much I am risking and how I go about calculating that and what is the right amount for me, how did I actually determine what was the correct amount? Because in my opinion, there is a 3-step framework that you guys can follow and you can go through. And if you consider all of these areas and you find an overlap between these three, I think you will find almost what you could consider the holy grail in terms of finding the right amount of risk for you. Because it's not as black and white as most people paint it out to be online. You'll see a lot of videos, course sellers, instructional threads written on social media that are all aimed towards this idea that you should not be risking more than 1% to 2%. And in a lot of cases, there can be some merit to that. There is a fair case to say that that is a good amount of risk, and you shouldn't really be exceeding that by a significant margin, because depending on a variety of criteria, which we're going to go through today, but that could be a little bit of a detriment to what you are doing in the markets. Okay. Now, before we go into understanding what this framework is, I want to talk about the two sides that we tend to experience, which causes to mess with our ability to be able to risk or manage risk effectively as part of everything that we do. First and foremost, I think we've got the conscious part of the mind, which is responsible for everything that we're actually aware of with regards to how we manage risk. And there are a lot of people that go wrong in this area, not because that they want to see themselves fail, but simply because often they haven't really given it the conscious thought to figure out what is actually right for them. For a lot of people, they are risking in a way that is either doing them some harm, so not actually helping them to succeed in the long run and making them blow up and blow accounts or go into a deep enough drawdown that they are unable to recover, or they're using an amount of risk that they are simply just not comfortable with, right? There's an amount of money on the line that doesn't allow them to be as consistent as they should be in the long run. And that's something that really messes with their performance, okay? Now, a lot of that usually comes back to the idea of really just a lack of information and people not truly understanding the idea behind leverage, correct position sizing, maybe using the correct stop loss for your specific type of strategy. And that's something that can very easily be fixed by just increasing your knowledge, really understanding how leverage works on both sides of the coin, really understanding position sizing and how it works for your specific edge, and really understanding that a stop loss should go in a specific place where it invalidates a certain idea, not because you want to keep your stop loss as small as possible so that you could have the maximum possible risk to reward, which is what a lot of people fall into the trap of doing, right? The other side to this, and I think one that we all should be very, very conscious of, is the side that there are a lot of people at the moment that are trying to rush the process. Now, you could take it from me, someone that has been in that situation where I really wanted to rush things. You kind of figure out the hard way that there is no real shortcut in this game. For you to develop the confidence, the belief, the trust, the statistics that actually support your edge, and then to couple that with a mindset that supports a probabilistic environment, as well as a framework that allows you to govern risk in a certain way, this all takes time to curate. And the reality is, most human beings, given the background, the schooling system, the way in which most of us are brought up in the modern day world, we're not really wired to thrive inside of a probabilistic environment. And this is something that we really need to be aware of. Okay. So I want you guys to understand that often the reason that we rush the process is something completely external and something that we need to become very, very mindful of. Because in this day and age, I tend to find that most people are trying to rush the process due to an unrealistic expectation that they've seen online, on social media, from friends, from family. They've created this timeline and this expectation about when they need to have succeeded by. And therefore, they believe the quickest way to make that happen is to increase the amount that they are risking so that their winners make more, but subsequently they're not able to really cope with the downside of what they are experiencing. Okay. So if you guys have an expectation, if you've given yourself a timeline to say, I want to be successful today, I want to get paid out tomorrow, I want to do X, Y, and Z in this specific time frame, I want you guys to stop and to actually ask yourself, where did that timeline come from? Where did the expectation become set? Where did it all become set in stone that this is when I need to succeed and why? The moment you can start identifying where specifically that expectation came from, then you can start to trace back and understand whether that is actually something that's a worthwhile belief in keeping. And secondly, is it actually doing you any service as part of your trading? Is it actually helping you to push you towards your goals? Because in my experience, from the majority of people that try and rush the process and try and create those overnight riches, it's possible to get lucky in a short space of time. But what separates luck from skill is what happens over an extended period of time and trades. And that's where you really start to see the difference between professionals and amateurs that do this in the long run. Okay. So I think the way I would like to sum that section up most poetically is this idea that the only shortcut you need to understand is understanding that there is no shortcut. Not falling for the overnight success and the 30-day riches puts you on the most linear path to achieving profitability. And yes, I can't promise it's going to happen overnight or in 3 months or in 6 months or 1 or 2 years. But if you follow at least the right path, you'll at least know that there is a goal at the end that is attainable as long as you're doing things in the right way. But for the vast majority of people, they're not even doing that to begin with. Okay. There's a beautiful quote by Alex Hormozy. And he says, the long way is the shortcut because the shortcut never really gets you there, right? The long way is the shortcut because the shortcut never really gets you there. And I think, it's something that can be applied to so many different areas of life, but specifically with trading, right? Think of how many people are trying to flip accounts overnight. How many people are trying to achieve a certain percentage return within a specific space of time, and how much that focus on something that you can't control is really screwing up your performance in the long run. So I really, from a conscious standpoint, I really want you guys to become mindful about where your timeline or your expectation has actually come from if you want to really succeed in the markets. Okay. Now, a couple of the more obvious ones, which I think stem from a conscious standpoint to a certain degree. These will all also come in when we talk about our subconscious very, very shortly. But from a conscious standpoint, there are a lot of people that come into the markets. And again, they have an inability to be able to manage risk effectively, right? They have a true inability to be able to manage risk effectively. And one of the biggest reasons behind that is because they are a slave to their emotions, right? Powerful word. Most people fail to be able to accurately manage risk over time because they are a slave to their emotions. If you do not have an ability to be able to become aware of your emotions and then actually regulate them, at some point in time, you are going to find that you are going to do something which costs you heavily in terms of your risk management. And that is something that you really need to be avoiding. So for most people, I think the mindset shift that you need to make from at least a conscious standpoint is that you need to understand that trading is not about turning your emotions off. It's not about saying, I need to get rid of fear. I need to get rid of greed. I need to get rid of frustration or anger. These are all very natural human responses. And the best thing that you could possibly do is actually go to a place whereby you can not turn the emotion off, but become aware of it and regulate it. And in that process, what you're doing is you're teaching yourself how to change how you respond to the emotion. And that's true power, because the reality is the emotion is never actually the problem. If you felt anger or frustration or greed, but you never acted on it, what detriment would it have in your trading? The honest answer is it wouldn't. It would play no role in your trading if you simply learn to acknowledge an emotion, but not react to it in the typical way that you are doing now. So I always say that actually the best framing to take to this is understanding that the problem is not the emotion. The problem is your reaction to the emotion. And the solution is not to turn the emotion off. The solution is to regulate how you are feeling. And you can only do that if you learn a framework in order to become aware of what you're experiencing, right? So for most people, an inability to manage and regulate their emotions is largely what causes an issue for them in managing their risk, and usually ends to a place where they are over leveraging and risking an amount of money that, again, they are not truly comfortable with. The last side from a conscious standpoint, and again, I think most people are kind of aware of this, but they don't like to admit this to themselves, is most people bring their ego with them into the market. They come from a position where they have been hardwired to believe that the key to actually not even making money, the key to being successful is all about being right. And this is something that we actually unpacked in our last session together. We talked about the idea of better accepting losses and why that is a difficulty for most people. And largely that goes back to our wiring, the software that we are running internally, which has been ingrained largely from the modern day schooling system, right? The schooling system in this day and age largely tells you that if you want to be successful, if you want to do well in school, and if you want to go on and get a very good job later in life, you have to be able to do well in your exams. And you can only do well in your exams if you put the right answer down. If you put the wrong answer down, you fail, or you don't get the grade that you need, and you will fall back, and you might have to resit a class, or you'll have to resit an exam. So you get punished for when you are wrong, and you get rewarded for when you are right. And the problem is when you absorb this kind of mentality in from a very young age, it tends to stick. It tends to become part of your belief system. You tend to start believing that in order to be successful, I have to be correct. And therefore, accepting losses is not something that you really want to do. It tends to open up the door to revenge trading. And that's what skews your entire perception around risk management. Okay. So I'm presuming that most people listening in to a call like this can relate to that at some point in time, whether that's something that you're experiencing now, whether that's something that you've experienced in the past and been able to move through. It seems to be a natural life cycle that most traders tend to go through. And of course, in line with the topic that we are discussing today, it seems to have a detriment to your ability to be able to manage risk effectively. Now, let's look at the other side of the coin here. Let's think about our subconscious mind for a second, right? I want to talk a little bit about our psychology and our belief system that underpins absolutely everything that we do. Because if you tuned into one of these calls before, you will understand that I carry this kind of philosophy that encompasses the idea that we were all born completely neutral. Nobody was born impatient. Nobody was born ambitious. Nobody was born hardworking. These are all traits. These are characteristics. They aren't things that you have or don't have. They are things that you do or don't do. And every single one of us has an ability to do all of those things. You might think in the large part of life in general, you believe that you're an impatient person, but I can promise you there is at least going to be one area of life where you can demonstrate a little bit more patience compared to others. I know this to be true for a lot of people that have children, right? A lot of people, even if they would consider themselves slightly impatient, or very impatient, they find that they are able to develop a certain level of patience to be able to manage and parent their kids in the way that they would truly like. So if you can do it in one area of your life, it's not that you're incapable of doing it in another area. You just have to learn how to take that over, right? So this is not about having a fixed trait that cannot be changed. This is all about understanding that there are certain characteristics and traits that have been learned throughout life. And if we learn to change the way we think about those things, we can start to reprogram the software that we run internally to help us to thrive inside of that probabilistic environment, okay? So from a subconscious standpoint, one of the things that tends to really hold us back is one that we've kind of already touched on, but I think not enough people are truly aware of where this comes from. And so again, I want to reiterate this point, but it comes from that maybe subconscious desire to rush the process. I've spoken to many traders in the past where we've talked about this idea of, why did you risk more here? Or why did you overtrade in this situation when your edge wasn't present? And when you start really digging back as to why most people have made these mistakes, you start understanding that there is a need for success. And the harsh reality, the thing that not many people will ever tell you as bluntly online, is that the market really doesn't care about your timeline for success. The market doesn't care if you've been in this game for a month, 3 months, 6 months, maybe a year, maybe a decade. The market does not care how many hours, how many late nights, how much you've sacrificed to be in this game. The market only cares about performance. So if you have external factors which are forcing you to rush certain things, rush certain positions, you have to stop and you have to ask yourself and make it a very, very conscious thing to figure out, where is that need to rush from? Where is the timeline for success? Where has it been created from, right? Because that external influence doesn't really work so well inside of a probabilistic environment. And for a lot of people, this can be a very, very subconscious push towards rushing the process, and one that we are often not aware of. Sometimes it comes from our children. Sometimes it comes from our family. Sometimes it comes from our friends, right? If you've got elderly parents, or you've got young children, or things that you would like to be able to do to be able to help them, that money would most definitely be able to assist in that situation, there may be an unconscious driver there to be able to create success in a quicker timeline than actually your process would normally dictate. But again, it's not something that we're very, very conscious of, at least in terms of the impact that it seems to have in our trading. And so what I say for most people is that you need to have a clear why on why you're feeling the need to rush. You need a why as to why you want to become a trader. Because let's be honest, trading has one of the most terrible statistics for actually becoming profitable, right? The odds of becoming a consistently profitable trader are significantly low. We're talking more than 90% of traders will typically fail to make an honest living from this game over a large enough sample size of time. So if you're truly serious about wanting to get into an industry whereby the failure rate is so high, the success rate is so low, what's your driver behind that? Like, you have to have a strong why if you want to succeed at something that only a very small percentage of people are actually able to do. Because if you don't have that, if you don't have that thing that pushes you, that picks you up from the slumps which trading will inevitably take you to at some point in time, you're going to fail. You're going to throw in the towel. It's going to be very easy to become emotional in certain situations. Now, when I talk about developing this why, I don't talk about it from the perspective of this needs to push you to do more and it forces you to do all the wrong things. What I'm talking about in certain situations is when you get real clarity on what your why is, why you're attempting to make it in arguably one of the hardest industries that possibly exists, then I would say your why serves a real purpose in actually holding some leverage over you to make sure that you do the things that you are supposed to do. And I'm talking about leaning into your why during moments where you're supposed to be disciplined, you're supposed to be patient, you're supposed to be managing risk in a certain way that allows it to work in alignment with your edge over time. You see, many people in those moments, for them, the pain of not being in the market outweighs the pain of everything else. And largely that's because they are not clear enough on their why. When you know that it's your kids' upbringing that is on the line, when you know that it's your parents' retirement that is on the line, and it all rides on your ability to be disciplined and patient and manage risk carefully in this moment, you'll start thinking about those little decisions very, very differently. You'll stop over risking or over leveraging or over trading in a way that negates your framework towards risk management in a certain way, because you'll have a much more empowering reason to do it, except for my plan says I should, right? When you can start creating that level of leverage on yourself, then actually becoming disciplined becomes far easier. Because I know certain people and this is not a direction at anyone in particular, because I think we've all been here, myself included, at one point in time. But there are certain people that will slack and not do certain things. But the moment the stakes are high enough, it's easy to do them, right? It's easy to do them. If somebody told you that you could never see friends, family, children, pets, any sort of loved ones again if you weren't able to be disciplined tomorrow or manage risk effectively tomorrow, what are the odds that you're a perfect risk manager tomorrow? Probably quite good. Because the reality is, when you have enough leverage, when you have enough reason to want to do the right things, you will find a way to do it. But the reality is, most people don't truly understand or have that power of leverage over themselves to really be able to understand how to make it work for them. Okay. Now, secondly, from a subconscious point, I want to talk a little bit more about the emotional side of things, right? Because I think this is one which trips a lot of people up. Now, there are a couple of things that I like to talk about when it comes to the psychology behind how we trade. And one of those specifically are cognitive biases. This is something that I've discussed on some of our previous sessions. So if this is the first time you're tuning in, if you're unfamiliar with this topic whatsoever, I would encourage you to please look back at some of our previous sessions. The recordings are available. And go back to, it would have been our second or third session together where we talked about the idea of cognitive biases in some greater detail. And we looked at specifically how it has an impact on us trading, being consistent, and actually making money over time. Now, two good examples of cognitive biases that seem to mess up our ability to manage risk. The first one, I think, needs no explanation. You guys will understand exactly what this is when I say it. It's overconfidence bias, right? Overconfidence meaning we are overestimating our ability in the market, and it is causing a detriment to how we are managing risk over time. Now, this, in a lot of cases, usually comes off the back of a streak of winning trades, or maybe even just one winning trade. Everyone is different. Everyone reacts differently to certain situations. So for some people, a single winning trade can send them on the highest streak of overconfidence, and it causes them to give it all back very, very quickly, right? But whatever is making you feel overconfident, this is a common psychological trap that we fall into. And one of the biggest reasons behind that is actually another cognitive bias, which is termed recency bias. This is one that you will hear me talk about a hell of a lot when I do certain sessions like this, because for us as human beings, recency bias has a huge impact on everything that we do, on everything in the way that we feel, and everything in the way that we think about approaching the markets in what we do. Now, recency bias is the natural human tendency for us to put more weight and emphasis on things which have happened recently, as opposed to what happens over a larger sample size of time. Like, for example, if you drive a car and you've had many hundreds, maybe thousands of successful car trips with no issues whatsoever, but then one day you were unfortunate enough to get into an accident, the chances are the first ride after you have your accident, you'll be very, very cautious. You'll be very wary, much like you would be if you were in a relationship and your partner was unfaithful, right? You had a bad relationship, you had a bad breakup as a result of that. The next time you think about dating, you will start to find that it becomes very easy to feel a lack of trust, a lack of desire to want to commit to the relationship to some degree, right? Excuse me. And a lot of the reason behind that can stem from the idea that there are hundreds, thousands, millions of successful relationships where people are perfectly faithful. There are hundreds, thousands, millions of successful car journeys where people have absolutely no issues. But often it can take one, sometimes traumatic, sometimes big event, but to really skew your perception of what you believe the world really consists of. It completely changes the framework of how you view the world. And that is very, very important to be aware of because it has a huge impact on your perception of the markets. Right, excuse me. So recency bias is one that you most definitely need to be aware of. And from a performance standpoint, it is one of the things that largely drives a big reason as to why after a few wins, it's easy to feel overconfidence, as we already discussed. And inversely, after a few losses, it's often easy to feel discouraged. So it's easy to lack confidence. It's easy to start doubting your strategy because you could have done all the back testing in the world. You could have collected all the data. But if your most recent experiences have all told you, hey, this does not work, you're more likely to doubt yourself. Those recent experiences really weigh heavy on you. And when that's the case, when that's what's fueling your subconscious mind and you're fueled with doubt or a lack of confidence or a fear to pull the trigger, you're more likely to make mistakes. You're more likely to screw up that level of risk management in a way which, again, is not going to help and work well for your edge in the long run. Okay. So what you need to start doing, if that's something that you can resonate with from an emotional standpoint, maybe you can resonate with those cognitive biases and you think, yes, like I feel overconfidence all the time, or I feel a lack of confidence every time I have a couple of losing trades in a row. The question that I would ask is, what exactly triggers those experiences? Like if it's a losing trade, how many losses does it take? Is it a single loss? Is it a specific amount monetary wise that causes you to start falling into that system of doubt? Similar with the upside, right? If we think about this idea of overconfidence, which is screwing up the way in which you manage risk, at what level do you start to feel overconfidence? Does it come off the back of one winning trade? Does it come after the fact that if you make $100 or $500 or $1,000, then you can't start to think clearly anymore? You have to get very, very clear on specifically what that is and how it impacts you in the long run. Because if you can never understand what the trigger is behind the emotion that you are experiencing, then actually breaking that pattern of behavior becomes very, very difficult. And that's something that you ideally want to be avoiding. Okay. So the key to breaking free of a lot of those emotions that are holding you back is understanding what the trigger is behind the emotion, and then asking yourself, why does that situation actually bother me? Why does it frustrate me? Why does the loss bother me so much? Until you can start to understand that, you will never truly understand the belief system which is driving many of the thoughts, the emotions, and subsequently the actions that you have over time. So it's all connected together. And all of it really requires bringing things from the subconscious mind to the conscious mind and paying more attention to things that are already within your conscious mind. And most importantly, journaling these things to ensure that you are aware of exactly what you're doing and how to perform, how to maximize that performance in the long run. Okay. So I'm hoping that's given you guys a little bit of clarity on some of the main reasons as to why most people struggle with risk management. There are very, very conscious things that we need to be aware of. And there are also very, very subconscious things that happen beneath the surface that we also need to be aware of. The process of actually asking yourself these questions and understanding what's going on beneath the surface and then journaling those things over time are all going to be really, really important to help you to understand how you guys are going to be able to thrive in the long run. Okay. Now let's get very, very practical for a second, because with every one of these sessions that I do, I always want to make sure that you guys are going away with something practical, maybe a thought-provoking idea, maybe a practical exercise, something that you can tangibly take away and say, okay, if I apply this into my framework for approaching the markets, it's likely to have a positive impact on what I'm doing. Okay. So in order to help you to become more effective risk managers in the grand scheme of what we're doing here, I want to share with you guys a 3-step framework that is really going to help you to understand how to find the right amount of risk, right? So now that we've unpacked what's going on beneath the surface and most of the common pitfalls that most people fall into, I want to spend a little bit of time helping you guys to understand a very process-orientated way to figure out exactly how much risk is the right amount for you. Now, again, please keep in mind that I don't believe that this is a black and white process. I do believe, however, you can get very, very accurate in figuring out what the right amount is for you if you truly consider these three areas. And the moment you can figure out what the right amount is for you, everything else will be easier going forward, because now you're working with an amount of money or a certain position size, which ticks a lot of different boxes, which psychologically puts you in a state of ease, which allows you to be more comfortable, confident, and trade with a little bit more clarity behind what you are doing going forward. Okay, so the first factor that I want to talk about, the first of three factors that I want to talk about, and I think this is going to be the obvious one. This is going to be the one that most people are aware of. Most people that are conscious of this are aware of. It's the account balance, right? This is the one when you ask somebody how much they risk per trade. This is usually their default answer. And it goes back to an arbitrary number, like we were discussing at the beginning. It's 1% of my account. It's 0.5% of my account. It's 2% of my account. And again, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. I think it's actually quite helpful to know the percentage that you are risking. It makes the math going easier in terms of calculating your position size going forward. And again, for those of you that are in this game and are really paying attention to your metrics, then obviously being aware of what percentage of your account balance you're risking is very, very useful, right? But this has been, I think, popularized in a way which it's not that it's not important, but in the grand scheme of becoming a long-term, consistently profitable trader is not the only factor that should be given importance, right? If you look outside of the realms of Darwinex and you look at some of the other, we'll call them modern day prop firms where you trade simulated capital and you're trying to get to specific payout objectives or, past certain challenges. These are all very short-term games that you are focused on playing, right? You are told that if you want to be able to play this game and you want to be able to get paid out, you have to stick within a certain percentage drawdown. In reality, and what you find here and what we're doing differently here at Darwinex is the aim for you guys is to become consistently profitable risk managers over time, right? Consistently profitable risk managers. And we understand that a consistent performance over time, it's not possible to go through it without a period of drawdown. And so telling people that, hey, if you hit a 10% drawdown, your strategy is unworthy and you need to start all over again, that's not really what a long-term track record is going to look like. Drawdown is a very statistical part of the game. It's not personal. It doesn't always mean you've done something wrong. It can in some instances, but if you're sticking to your plan, if you're managing risk, if you've got a good sound psychology, then the chances are you're probably doing something which is completely normal. And statistically, you're just going to lose sometimes. That is just part of the game. But the problem is most people focus on this aspect of risk management almost blindly. They simply ask themselves, okay, forget how much capital I'm trading, forget my approach and my personality. Let's just focus on a percentage of my account balance because I heard online that is the best thing that you should do. And from here on forward, I'm going to be risking 1% of my account. Okay. And again, a smaller percentage, 1-2% is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not always to say that you're also maximizing your edge to the best of your capability as well. Okay. So it's one factor that you should consider. It's an important metric, but it's not the only. And it's the one that I'm probably going to spend least time on today because I can presume if you're here, if you're tuning into a call like this, then you probably understand that area quite well. If you've got a little bit of experience in the markets, if you're using the platform here at Darwinex, I'm sure this is something that you are considering at least when you are taking or choosing your position size when you're getting into a trade. Okay. Now, the second side to this is where I think probably most people should spend a large chunk of their time, but most people spend absolutely zero of it in this area. And this is your strategic edge in the market and actually asking you, what is the right amount to be risking in terms of your strategy? Because let me give you an example. If I told you, for example, that, hey, I have a strategy and with this strategy, I risk, let's say 5% per trade. Now, some of you might think that is an ungodly amount of risk to be taking on in one specific position. You'll say, hey, if you were to lose 3, 4, 5 losing trades in a row, which is, again, completely possible, that's not going to look, not going to be so well for your account. And in the majority of cases, from a black and white perspective, if I was to be asked generic advice, I normally wouldn't encourage 5% risk per trade. However, and let's talk completely hypothetically here for a second. If somebody approached me and said, hey, I've got a strategy that I've back tested over 1,500 times over the last decade of price action, and it produces a 90% win rate. And with that 90% win rate, because my win rate is so high, I risk 5% per trade, because the chances of me going into or experiencing a losing streak is not impossible, but it's less likely. But also because my win rate is so high and I'm likely to win so many of my positions, risking a high amount is not a crazy thing for me. Whereas if somebody else approached me and said, hey, well, I'm an extremely profitable trader and I have a 42% win rate, but hey, I'm risking 10% per trade. Is that really warranted? We know, the statistics will tell you that with a 50% win rate over the next 500 trades, you could expect around 9 losing trades in a row. Not 9 losing trades ever, 9 losing trades in a row, right? That's not personal. That's not you saying you've made a mistake and you've done something wrong. That is simply a statistical part of playing the game. With a strategy that has roughly a 50% win rate, you are likely to experience around 9 losing trades in a row. So if you're saying that you have a sub 50% win rate, what are we talking here? 10, 11, 12 losing trades in a row? Can you stomach that with 5% risk? Can you stomach that with 10% risk per trade? Probably not. Whether you could actually come back from that financially is one thing. Most people wouldn't be able to do that psychologically, right? You have to remember, if you take a 50% drawdown, you need 100% return just to get back to break even. That for a lot of people will break most people, right? A lot of people will struggle with that idea. So what I say to most people is, by better understanding your strategy and your win rate, you will start to understand what is the likelihood of you experiencing a set of losses or a period of losses over a specific point of time. And importantly, you will start to understand what is the likelihood of me experiencing a string of losses over time. Because if somebody approaches me and says, hey, I've been through my data, I've been through X, Y, and Z, and based on that, I have a very high win rate, and therefore I'm actually risking a little bit more than what the arbitrary amounts are that I've spoken about online. Most people recommend 1%. I actually risk 4.5%, because with my win rate, I can justify that amount. And I've already determined that actually, if I was to take more than 2 losers in a row, I would scale my risk down half, and that would work absolutely best for my strategic edge in the long run, right? If somebody approached me and they said, hey, I've got a 90% win rate that I've back tested from over 1,000 occasions over the last 5 years of price action, and I'm risking 0.25%, I'm going to say, well, maybe there's something to look into here about maybe using a little bit more risk. Maybe there's something that you could be doing here that would actually maximize your performance in the long run. Now, again, Darwinex is fantastic for this sort of thing, because you will find that your Darwin will actually be scaling your risk up or down depending on what you're doing, right? It's actually designed to try and help and maximize your performance in the long run. But that doesn't mean that you should be blind in just letting that do the work for you. What would be ideal is for you to really understand the metrics that are being captured and provided back at you inside of your dashboards to really help you to understand, how can I maximize my performance in the long run? Because that's how you're going to become the most effective trader that you can possibly be, right? It's having a deep understanding of your data, your edge in the market, what conditions it works well in, what conditions it doesn't work so well in, and how you can actually maximize that performance over time. And it's an area that really not enough people know well enough to really maximize their performance. Okay, so that's the second part, the strategic side. So we've covered the blanket, the general advice that most people give, which is using a certain percentage of your account. And then we've covered the deeper side, which is the strategic element, right? What does your strategy say about your performance statistically, and does that align with the amount of risk that you are specifically taking? Okay. The third side to this, and I would say again, an equally an important side to the strategic element, I would say is your personal risk tolerance, right? And this is the amount of money that you as an individual are actually comfortable in losing. Let's say for a second, I shared with you guys here today a strategy that had a 50% win rate. It was a profitable strategy. It had a risk to reward that could capture maybe 1 to 4 in every trade that you could take. It was a very, very mechanical system. And I said, right, I'm going to give you all an account of X thousands of dollars. The amount is irrelevant. And I said, right, in order to really maximize this edge, I want you all to be risking 4% per trade. It's got a very high strike rate. I've done the testing, I've done the math, and at a 4% risk per trade, it will actually be the right amount to maximize my performance from a strategic standpoint. Do you think everybody's going to be comfortable with 4% risk? Do you think everyone's going to cope with that in the exact same way? Do you think that everyone is going to be inclined to manage positions in the exact same way if I gave you an account balance of an amount of money that maybe you weren't used to trading? You might be used to risking, 1, 2, 5, 10% of your account on a $100, $500, $1,000 account, for example, right? But if you were to be given a certain level of capital, $100,000, $100,000, let's say 500, $1 million, right? If you were to be given a very, very high amount of capital, you still risking 4% per trade? Is that 4% going to mean the exact same to you, right? You have to remember that, like, you take a $1,000 account, if you start risking $10 per trade, that's your kind of 1% risk. And for some people, that might be the upper limit of what they would like to be able to cope with. You take that same 1% risk and you apply it to $1 million account. Very, very different amount of money. And a lot of people will tell you that, hey, thinking in those percentages and thinking in those R multiples will help keep your mind off of the idea of how much money is at stake. And that's what's going to make you more process orientated. And in some instances, it's possible. But what I find is your mind isn't silly. Your mind is actually one of the most sophisticated and complicated things that till this day, most people truly don't understand how everything works internally. Your mind knows how much money is at risk. If you've got 3, 4, 5 accounts that you're managing and you've got them all on a trade copier, whether it's conscious or subconscious, if you're risking 1% per trade, how much capital you have under management. You're doing the math. You're understanding exactly what that tolerance is. And so what I say to most people is actually take a second just to think past the percentage for a second. Actually ask yourself if you're comfortable in risking X amount of dollars, right? Genuinely, a real conversation that I had with a client in a one-to-one. They approached me with the idea that I'm not able to accept losses well, and I don't understand why, because I'm risking 1% of my account, and I just seem to be always frustrated and angry after every loss that I take. And I said, okay. I said, well, let's ignore the percentage for a second. Let's actually talk about the monetary amount. How much money would you be comfortable in losing today and you'd still be able to come back tomorrow and be process orientated? What is the limit? Like, at what point do you go from perfectly fine to I've now lost an amount of money that I'm really not comfortable with, and now I'm pissed off and I want to get it back from the markets? And they answered, well, maybe that level for me is about $100. And I said, okay, that's completely fine. Well, based on what you're doing right now, you said you're using a 1% risk. What does that 1% risk actually equate to? And they said, well, I'm trading a 100K prop firm account, and that 1% risk is $1,000. And I said, right. So your pain threshold for risk is $100, but you're currently risking $1,000. And when you lose, you're wondering why you're being frustrated by the outcome of a lost trade. He's like, yeah. And I'm like, are we starting to connect the dots here? Are we starting to see what is going on beneath the surface? If you're never truly comfortable with the amount of money that's at stake, it will be almost impossible to do the right things in line with your plan, right? An attachment to money will always kill and ruin whatever performance you could possibly put on in the markets. Okay. So you have to be able to fine tune this. And one of the things that I like to talk about, and one of the ways in which most people end up going wrong when it comes to understanding their certain risk tolerance, is first and foremost, they don't understand what their baseline is. They don't understand where should I be starting because they never actually ask themselves the question. Now, the analogy that I give to most people, this is one that I probably shared on a previous call with you guys, but I think it works so well in the context of what we're talking about here. If you were to go to the gym and your goal was that at some point in time, I want to bench press 100 kg, would it make sense on your first time ever going in, never done a bench press in your life, would it make sense to load up the bar with, let's say 80 kg, bar weighs 20, and to try and bench 100 kg on your first attempt? I think most people would agree it's probably not the smartest approach. There are, I'm sure there are worse things that you could do, but it's not a good idea, okay? Now, if you then started with a very little amount, let's say 20 kg, just the bar, and you started bench pressing that, and you said, actually, that's not too bad. I'm going to raise it to 22 and a half or 25. And you did this for 6 months and you scaled up slowly. And then after 6 months, you were benching 50 kg quite comfortably. Would at that point, it make sense to say, hey, you know what? I've been doing this for 6 months. I think I'm ready. My form is great. I've been consistent with what I'm doing. I've shown up. I'm now going to jump from 50 to 100. And again, even in that context, despite the consistency, most people will understand that actually having that jump in that way, trying to rush that process is actually going to do more harm than good, right? You're going to be in a situation whereby you might feel ready mentally. You might be wanting to go to that next level, but your body is not ready. Your body isn't equipped yet to manage the weight that you're about to push. Your mind works the exact same way with money. You might want to be able to risk and manage. I want to be able to risk $1,000 per trade because then it means my upside is $2,000 to $3,000, and my downside is maybe $1,000 or so. Okay, but you don't get to $1,000 simply by saying I've put in 6 months to my craft and now I'm ready. So I'm going to jump from my $1,000 live account to $100,000. Any other account. It doesn't work that way. You have to scale up in a way that works best for you. And just like in the gym, you give yourself progressive overload. You add weight slowly over time and your body adjusts and it gets stronger and it grows. And that's what allows you to eventually carry the weight that you're looking for. Same with your mind. Psychologically, when you want to manage a larger amount of capital, you have to ease your way up over time. So whilst today you might only be comfortable risking $10, in 3 months from now, that might go up to $50 because the more you experience the same thing over and over again, the way the human mind works is it becomes normal for us, right? At one point in time, maybe you got a new car or a new phone or a new item of clothing. How long did it take for it just to become another phone, another item of clothing, another, pair of shoes, whatever it is? It doesn't matter. You always adapt to your surroundings. That is part of human nature. And all you need to do is just submit to time if you're looking to develop that ability to be able to scale up your capital under management over time. But you have to approach it in the right way. So for me, that is the kind of 3-factor approach that I think most people don't really consider when it comes to optimizing your risk management in the long run. You want to be considering your overall account balance so that you can be risking a percentage that actually makes sense for your account, right? You will find that if you have an account of, let's say you're managing $100,000, 1% risk might be completely fine for you. You might be okay with that. But if you go back to risking 1% on a $100 account, maybe you're not going to treat that seriously because you're used to carrying more money, right? So the money actually plays a very, very important role as part of what you're doing. It's not the only role, but it's an important one. And you have to be able to look past just the percentage of the account balance that you're thinking about using to ask yourself if it's the right amount of money, right? Then you've got the strategic element. What does my data suggest could be the right thing for me over a large sample size of trades and time? What is my average hit rate? What is the likelihood of me experiencing X amount of losses in a row? And how does that work in line with my current risk parameters? Because if you've got a very high strike rate, and you've got enough data to quantify it, I would actually argue it's not crazy to be using a little bit more risk than average Joe that you've seen online. But on the flip side, if you generally have a lower win rate, and that's what allows you to have your edge in the market, but then you're still being very, very aggressive with your risk, then I would say, again, probably not doing yourself any favors. You're more likely to blow an account than to actually make it, okay? So these are things that you need to be keeping in mind. And the last side of this is coupling this together with your risk tolerance. How much money are you comfortable in actually losing? The problem is most traders, when they get into a position or when they're eyeing up or analyzing a market, all they are doing is asking themselves, am I comfortable with the upside? Am I comfortable with making X amount of money? And they're like, yes, well, that would pay for my rent and my mortgage, and this would be a meal out. This, they start thinking about all these crazy things that the market does not care about. And the more you develop that attachment, the worse your performance will be over time. So as well as looking at the upside on each of the trades that you're taking, you also want to be prioritizing and asking yourself, are you actually comfortable with the downside? If you're risking 1% per trade, fantastic, right? But is 1% the right thing for you strategically? Is 1% the right amount for you? And you're actually going to be comfortable with that 1%, whether it's $100 or $100,000, right? That's something that you need to be very, very conscious about and thinking about when it comes to how you approach risk management in the grand scheme of things, okay? Last thing that I want to share with you guys very briefly is a few tips on actually implementing all of this into part of your trading going forward, right? Like I said, I like for these sessions to be very, very practical. I like for you guys to be able to take something away, to be able to implement part of these ideas and, thought-provoking conversations that we're having on these sessions to actually take them into your trading. So how do you actually start to take these ideas and put them into what you're doing? I would say probably the most effective thing that you could be doing is using a pre-trade checklist. Now, again, if you've attended one of these sessions before, if you're familiar with any of the content that I put out online, this is probably not going to be the first time that you've heard me speak about this, right? A pre-trade checklist for me is simply a list of criteria that governs certain things which need to be checked off before you can validate getting in or getting out of a market, or in some conditions, maybe even managing a specific position. Most people don't have this. Now, I actually took this idea when I heard that pilots use this all the time. Pilots, regardless of experience, they go through a pre-flight checklist before takeoff every single time. It's a simply safety protocol. They go through, they say, have I checked this, this, and this? Okay, fantastic. We're good to take off now. Because pilots understand that it takes one mistake, one oversight, one lapse in judgment to have massive consequences based on what happens next. And I think traders need that same mentality. They need to understand that I need this pre-trade checklist to make sure that I'm doing all the right things that are going to allow me to manage risk effectively so that I can perform to the best of my ability. Because the reality of this game is you could do the right thing for days, weeks, maybe even months. And sometimes all it really takes is one lapse in judgment, one poor day where you don't manage risk in the right way you should have, and you could undo weeks, months of hard work all in one go. That is the reality of what this game is like, okay? So I would say as part of your pre-trade checklist, obviously in line of what we've been talking about today, you want to have your risk assessment on there. You want to be able to understand, am I using the right amount of risk in line with my account balance, my strategy, and my risk tolerance? Because if I've ticked all of those three boxes, I now have a pretty well-rounded approach to understand that this is the right amount to maximize my return in the long run. So make that as part of your list. Am I using X percentage because of X, Y, and Z? Can I tick that off? What about the market conditions? Are the market conditions primed for my strategy? Is this actually a good day to try and go to war with the markets? Because the reality of this game is every strategy works, but it doesn't work in all market conditions, right? So the moment you get clarity on what market conditions really work best for you, this could be something that you implement into your pre-trade checklist to say, hey, I only trade range-bound markets, or I only trade trending markets, or if I'm a trending market trader, when it's a range-bound environment, I need to be sitting out. This all works well as part of your edge and something that you can implement as part of your pre-trade checklist, okay? Subsequently, you then want to be able to check in with your emotions, something that we spent quite a bit of time talking about today in terms of what influences that decision-making going forward. But if you can check in with those emotions, how am I feeling today? What am I thinking today? Am I carrying the weight of my performance yesterday into the markets today? Because if all of that was happening, maybe you're not in the best mental space to be able to make decisions that impact how you manage money, essentially almost for your living in some instances. Okay, so these are all things that you can start working through in alignment with any other criteria that gets you in and out of the market. Okay, so these are things that you can simply just add on that will help you to assess the market conditions, your risk profile, and your kind of psychological state to make sure those boxes are checked off to ensure that you're a good state to be moving forward. I truly believe if you implement that part of everything that we've talked about today into that pre-trade checklist, you will develop a much higher consistency in your approach towards the market. And my belief is always that the more consistently you approach the markets as a trader, doing all the right things that you're supposed to in alignment with your edge, the more likely you are to find that consistent profitability, right? A consistently profitable trader doesn't become that way because of an inconsistent approach. It's not how things work. Consistency out requires consistency going in. And that's the mindset that I want you guys to think about and take away from today's session. Okay, we will call it a day here. Thank you guys so much for tuning into today's session. I hope it's, again, given you something to think about, something to take away, something to just ponder over, to figure out if you're actually using the right amount of risk to maximize your performance in the markets. As always, if you guys do have any specific suggestions, if you have challenges, hurdles that you're going through, and that you would like to figure out how to move past this, I'm putting on these sessions every other week at the moment. And if it is something that you guys would like me to tailor based on what you're experiencing, please drop a message in the Discord. Just drop me a tag in that and just give me a topic suggestion. Let me know what you're struggling with or dealing with, and I will be more than happy to tailor that into a session for you in the long run, which will help you to work through the challenges to improve your performance. Okay, I will leave you guys to enjoy the remainder of your day. Thank you guys so much for your time and energy today. And again, thank you to the Darwinex team for allowing me to host for another week. I hope you have a disciplined remainder of the week, and I will speak to you again very, very soon. Take care, my friends.